It's Luis Brecci.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great. Yeah. EOS Argentina, as I think you're an advisor there.
Yeah,
And really excited to hear about what kind of you're up to with and then I'll let you have the floor here. So
great. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get started. So I'll be talking today a little bit about EOS Law and eoslaw.io, which is a project that I've been working on lately. It's called, we call it the only law firm specialized in EOS Law. So before we start on the technical part, I wanted to introduce myself. So a little bit about me. I'm a tech lawyer with experience in multiple industries in the internet space. I've worked for a long time with e-commerce, software as a service, gaming, and naturally blockchain companies and entrepreneurs. I'm currently a researcher on blockchain and decentralized autonomous organizations at the Cornell University Law School, where I basically research the legal implications of blockchain technology and DAOs in our current legal systems. I'm a legal advisor to the block producer EOS Argentina, which is one of the 21 elected block producers. I am the founder of eoslaw.io, which I'll talk a little bit more about today, and also a partner at Chain Fund Capital, which is a fund that specializes in blockchain investments, notably research-based blockchain projects. So let's talk a little bit about what I come to call EOS Law. So probably all of you know that EOS has its own constitution and a dedicated arbitration forum. That's definitely one of the most interesting parts of EOS to all of the people that are in the space, especially for me as a lawyer. It's very interesting to see we're trying to deviate a little bit from that national law and local court standard. So that's one of the reasons why I became so involved in the EOS community and the EOS ecosystem. But there's something that we don't see being discussed a lot, and we had Adam, he spoke on this section, talk a little bit about it. But in addition to arbitration, does the fact that we have a constitution and contracts underlying that always make reference to that constitution, does that actually mean that we are looking at a body of law that would be similar to national law? So can we call something, is there something that we could call EOS law? So that question might be answered by Article 10 of the EOS Constitution, which reads, choice of law for disputes shall be in order of precedence, this Constitution and the maxims of equity. So, and this is a question I would ask people in the audience. Have you ever wondered, if you filed a dispute, what law do you claim? Because when you go to a court or even a normal arbitration, you usually claim, so I signed this contract, and this is a contract that was signed under, let's say, California law or under French law or German law, whatever it is, right? So in the case of EOS, we have this question: is the EOS Constitution creating sort of a legal system of itself, or are we still going to be subject to the national legal systems, right? So my opinion is that we'll probably see a rise in what we can call EOS law. So at some point, I have the belief that this is something that will be challenged in courts, and we'll see how that evolves. But it is likely that the EOS ecosystem could develop into something that is similar to a national legal system, where when people go and they file a claim with ECAF, for example, they would claim that somebody is violating EOS law, somebody's violating the EOS Constitution, and therefore EOS law. So this is going to create a lot of market, this is going to create a lot of research that relates to this new legal system. So we would be looking, for example, into lawyers that specialize in this thing called EOS Law. And this is what I'm trying to do with eoslaw.io, become one of the only lawyers. That's why we call ourselves the only law firm specialized in EOS Law. But let's talk a little bit more about what EOS Law really, so what is the EOS body of law? So basically, as we read there, the EOS Constitution makes reference to itself as the choice of law for disputes under EOS, and also the maxims of equity. We also have naturally behind, under the EOS Constitution, we would have the contracts that we sign, and whether these are smart, Ricardian, or traditional paper contracts, these would also comprise part of the EOS body of law. So whenever I file a claim, so let's say that I paid John Doe to paint my house, and I paid him EOS. We did a smart contract that was signed by both parties, and he never came to pay my house, even though I paid him the 10 EOS, and I go to ECAF trying to get my money back. I can claim a breach of contract and possibly a breach of the EOS Constitution as well, because that contract makes reference to the Constitution. And the next question is, so we're talking about EOS as this closed system, and this is the way I've come to see it, but what is the role of national laws within EOS? We're going to see a lot of, so this is something that it's very intertwined. We'll see as we grow as a legal system, as a closed system, we'll see a lot of communication between national laws and EOS law. Especially in the beginning, it is very likely that we will need to take a little bit of these national law principles or rules and try to apply them to EOS by analogy. And the reason for that is because we do not have a full legal system yet. We still need to either work on a more complex constitution, or we'll see more precedent coming out of the arbitration awards that are going to create the legal rulings. But for now, that doesn't exist yet. So it's very expected, it's normal that we see the arbitrators or even the lawyers or the parties to an arbitration proceeding taking a little bit of the national law principles and applying that through analogy to whatever their case might be on EOS. So we're definitely going to see a lot of interesting communication between national laws and EOS law. I'm assuming it will depend naturally on the education, the formation of the parties that are involved. So if all the parties and the arbitrator are in the United States, it is likely that they would take some of the principles that are U.S. law principles or specific to a certain state, and the same would apply for someone in China, for example. But we'll definitely see a lot of communication between that until the point that EOS becoming we see EOS becoming a legal system of its own, so with its own rules that would be defined through the contracts, the Constitution, or even the decisions themselves that the arbitrators give. So that being said, I hope I explained a little bit about what I think EOS law is, as opposed to there's a big fuss about the arbitration, and it's a very interesting thing, definitely. But I also feel like one of the most interesting things is that people don't talk a lot about it, but is that we're really trying to do a new legal system, a closed system that wouldn't necessarily have to interact with national legal systems. So I hope I was able to convey that message a little bit. Now I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about eoslaw.io, which is one of the initiatives that relates to EOS law. So eoslaw.io is the first law firm specialized in EOS law. Our goal is to help users and entrepreneurs understand the legal implications of doing business on the EOS blockchain. So what some of the services we provide are EOS arbitration proceedings. As you probably know, so right now there's very little legal expertise that is put into assisting the parties to arbitration proceedings. We still don't see a lot of lawyers that are involved in the EOS blockchain. Right now, for example, if you want to file an arbitration proceeding, the usual ways that you go into a website and there's kind of like a contact us box where you file a claim, and so I wouldn't call it unprofessional, but it's still something that still needs a lot of development, right? And what we want to do is professionalize the space by giving proper counsel to the people we work with, and also making the job of the arbitrators easier. When you have a legal expert that is handling the arbitration proceeding, the collection of evidence is much easier. The argumentation has much more of there's a legal expertise behind that. So we want to make the job of the arbitrator a little bit easier as well, and kind of streamline that whole arbitration process. We also want to help entrepreneurs and users understand and draft contracts, whether these are Ricardian, smart, or traditional paper contracts. And naturally, as in blockchain, this is an important part. We're also looking into helping people, users and entrepreneurs, launch token sales, airdrops, and general legal advice, general counsel for people that are on the EOS blockchain. A second branch of the eoslaw.io will be our research lab. So we are creating what we want to do. We want to have eoslaw.io as a go-to place for research on everything related to EOS law. So we want to possibly finance research about EOS law. We want to have legal scholars and just general scholars publish articles on eoslaw.io about EOS law. We want to create a national law watch where we would be tracking any developments in the legislation, in the precedents that somewhat relate or may have an impact on the EOS ecosystem. And ultimately, we also want to create a EOS law repository where basically we would store all of the history related to EOS law. So we would store, let's say, all the previous and current constitution, EOS constitution, any decisions, arbitration awards that become public, and also articles that relate to EOS law. So that was a bit of my presentation. It was a very brief one. If you guys want to get in touch, you can contact me at luis@eoslaw.io, or you can also message me on Telegram at luisvr. Thanks a lot, and I think we'll open up for questions now. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, or as I mentioned, you can always contact me later, and I'll be happy to follow up on that.
Any questions, guys? Real quick, maxims of equity. I heard that a few times. I think I even read the definition before, but now, I mean, how do you explain that?
That's a great question. You know, it's very broad. I mean, you can't define that really. But what we're looking at is probably, this is one of the intersections that I mentioned between national law and EOS law. I think we'll probably take advantage of national law principles and apply that to the cases that we see on EOS. So just as an example, let's say we want to apply maxims of equity. Let's look at a case that focuses a lot on equity. So let's say an unconscionability case, right? So let's say that someone, let's say I sign a contract with you that is utterly unfair to me, and I could not have possibly signed that in my sound mind. So in U.S. courts would usually look at that as an unconscionable case, meaning that that contract, there was no consent, proper consent there, so that contract is not valid, right? That's one of the cases where we would try to use national laws and apply them to EOS law, and we would use that through maxims of equity. So basically, we would just look at similar cases that may have happened some time ago and try to apply them into our case because they are analogous, right?
Okay, great. So yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's great. It's exciting to be kind of part of this new kind of legal framework that this is new kind of governed blockchain I guess necessitates. So any other questions from you guys, and then we're running a little bit over on time, so maybe one last question if you guys have any. All right, so people know how to get in contact with Luis, and thanks so much. And I'll
Thank you for having me. I'll put my email on the chat box as well, so if anybody wants to reach me, they can reach me there.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Have a good day.